start record because I know people want to see this later. Welcome, everybody. We are going to talk about storytelling trends and how we can think about storytelling trends as storytellers to make us better at the art of storytelling. That's really what this is about. And so one of the things that I like to do is have different guests on. I'm your host, Kathy Klotz-Guest, and I'm the founder of Keeping It Human, and I help businesses tell their stories. And we've got Park Howell, who I love talking to. He is the founder of Park & Co., also helps businesses tell their stories, and he's also the lovely host of the Business of Story podcast.
I don't know if I'd say lovely. I have a face built for podcasting.
Some days I feel like I have hair made for radio, so it all evens out, right? It all evens out. And I'm going to add people in just a second. So welcome everybody, and welcome if you're just joining us. You can ask questions. I'm going to open up the seats in just a little bit, and Park and I are going to get started with some questions. And then if you have a question too and you don't want to be on camera, not a problem. You can go ahead and type in the text area, type in your question, and I'll go ahead and read it and we'll answer it. So again, we'll be opening up those seats in just a second, but let's go ahead and get that ball rolling. Park, what do you think in terms of storytelling trends? I know we've talked a little bit about this before on your podcast. What are some of the big things that you're seeing that you think businesses need to be really mindful of as we evolve in storytelling?
Mm-hmm. I think, per your website, keeping it human. And I'm seeing that more and more in the B2B world, that the leadership is still having a hard time in B2B marketing, professional services firms, understanding how to get out of their own way when talking about their business. And I think I'm starting to see the lieutenants, the communications folks underneath them, like, no, we have to buy into a little bit more of what's happening story-wise, because it's happening to them. It's happening online with what people are, the stories that they're sharing about their companies and so forth. So I see a trend. There seems to be more momentum around story. It's not so much of a gimmick as it used to be, in their mind's eye anyways. And those that are using it well are really, experiencing the benefits from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. And I'm going to give you props. The other thing we can do here is we can give a little applause, like to give props. Yay! Yay! Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? We can give some love on the Friday before Valentine's Day, which is
look at that.
I'm so in agreement with you, and obviously, I believe totally in keeping it human. I double down on that, but I think you're right. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that there's still a lot of businesses where they still think that they own the brand, and they seem to have never gotten the memo that they don't own the brand. And it's like, well, we can't give up control. And it's like, well, you kind of don't really have it because it's owned by your users, and you're never this idea of that you ever had it in the first place is sort of, it's never been true. So it's not that you're losing control. You never really had it. So there's the reality that you have to deal with. And you can either let go and entrust that your best advocates and your champions and your loyal customers are going to do the right thing because they love your brand, or you can try to tighten the reins. And it's really interesting how a lot of brands that are very millennial focused seem to be getting that. And there's a lot of brands that have kind of a longer heritage, if you will, that still kind of are stuffy, and they're caught in that the last dying gasps of like trying to cling to something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think that the truth of the matter is that brands, and you and I are in the storytelling business for businesses, but the brands are truly the story makers. Yeah. They have to craft them. They do tell them, but they're making the story. But then, just as you said, they hand it off to their users and their customers who become the storyteller around that brand. And they're more than happy to tell their story on Yelp and other places, both good, the gory and the glory, either way, depending on the interaction with the brand, the way it's being messaged, how they're handling their messages. And it's forcing the hands of the brands to get better about this storytelling. And I think of some old brands that still do an amazing job. Now, granted, this is going to be more on a customer business to consumer level, but Patagonia, since the very beginning, they were never about advertising and marketing. They were always about telling that story about using the outdoors, but let's be good to the outdoors, and not in a tree hugging way either. And throughout their whole, 43 years in business, they have never, ever swayed from that. And they're very authentic. And when they make a misstep, they share that misstep with the world through their Footprint Chronicles website. And they've got a couple good books out on just how they approach the sale of Patagonia and turning customers into really brand evangelists and activists is what they actually call them, activists on behalf of the planet and activists on behalf of the brand. And I think they've done a really nice job of staying true to their brand.
Absolutely. And that's a great example. And I also think that Patagonia is a great launching point for sort of another trend that I see out there. And that is really this idea of data visualization to make the story, to make the case for you. And there's a lot of companies that are starting to use it because we forget that there's a story. Data tells a story. And so the more that we actually are tuned into that data, and we can actually make sure that the story that tells is interactive. And I look at a lot of what NASA is doing lately, and they do some really interesting stuff. And they started with sort of the Mars rover and helping people understand the universe and what's at stake and why Mars matters and why the concept of water and life matters on these planets and how it affects NASA's research. What they're doing with this the Earth Observatory and the way that they're putting out pictures and information about it. They remind people what NASA's story is all about, what their mission is. And it's so much bigger than just manned flights to the moon and to all these other things. And so I think this whole visual storytelling thing, obviously, is so huge. But if you use it in the right way, there's so many other ways to enrich the story and to buttress the story that you're telling. And data visualization, I think, is a big part of that visual thing,
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about data, of course, in the technology world, which you have a huge, a long, extensive background in working with technologists up out of the Bay Area. And what through my teaching at ASU in the School of Sustainability, I am forever trying to coach and coax our students into, as Robert McKee, the legendary screenwriter, would say, turn data into drama. Yeah. And I just had this conversation again today, this morning over coffee with another professional services firm. And this is what I tell them when they think about data. And why data is the foundation for the story, but it's not the story you want to tell.
Yes.
So, for instance, data does one of three things. Data reports on an event that has happened. It monitors and records an event that is currently happening, or it attempts to predict an event in the future that will happen. Yeah. But our minds only care about the event. And the reason why is because an event can kill us. Data never will. Yeah. So that story is born in that event. And so I tell folks, as borrowing from Robert McKee, all right, data is important. You've got to get this data point across. Now wrap it in a story about the event that data either is reporting on or is attempting to predict. And that seems to be a good rule of thumb that I'm now getting these technologically minded folks to think about and bringing story into their lives.
It's a really important point. And I love that you said that because it's fascinating to me. Like I had a conversation with somebody who was very, who was a climatologist and worked with NASA on the whole climate change story. And one of the really interesting conversations I had, because my husband works at NASA and he meets all these different people, he meets these really amazing people. And the conversation was very interesting because one of the things that he posited was, his big regret was the way that the climate change story had been told. And it was told in such a sterile, factual way that they omitted what you and I know is true, the human drama from it all. And it became scary and all about data versus, look, this is reality. This will affect everybody. We're all connected together. We're all, as human beings, we are all affected by this. But the good news is even though here's what we can't undo, there's a lot we can change. So it left out the empowerment, the interactive sort of with the audience, be part of the story. And one of his big regrets was that so much of the story got hijacked by egos, and we won't name names, but by egos who really wanted to really kind of claim it versus talk about what people could do differently and expand that human drama. And I thought, as the more I heard him talk, and this is a very, well-educated scientist, it's like, exactly, because there's a recognition that human drama has to mesh with the data somewhere,
Who do you think, and you've seen out there, has done a good job with their storytelling, especially in the professional services firm side, where it's, arguably a little bit more difficult to dial into the story of their business?
Well, in terms of professional services in general, or do you mean sort of maybe a technology company per se, do you think?
Yeah, it could, I'm really thinking in the B2B realm.
Yeah, I'll tell you who I think. So I think, I don't know, it's B2B, it's also B2C. I say Microsoft is getting a lot better at telling their story, and how technology is changing people's lives. Like I have heard them talk about how technology for those with disabilities, it's enabling them to do all these amazing things. And so they're starting to tell these really human stories in a way that they didn't tell before. So I'm impressed by that. I think Marketo has done a really interesting job. And believe it or not, I think Salesforce has done a much better job. And one of the really interesting things about Salesforce is, if you've ever been to Dreamforce, which is their giant behemoth conference in San Francisco, that you think the Super Bowl traffic in the Bay Area was bad? Dreamforce in San Francisco basically shuts down the city for 3-4 days. But what's so brilliant about their conference is that they've got people from politics and from, Disney Studios and all these different places talking about the work that they do. It is not hey, we're all about Salesforce and CRM and blah, blah, blah. They're telling their story by letting their customers tell their amazing stories of what they're doing. And so they're just a silent partner in all of this. So I think Salesforce has done a pretty amazing job of keeping the customer the focus versus making it about their CRM. So I think there are pockets of really good storytelling out there where the technology isn't the main message, and I like seeing that. I wish I could say that I'm seeing that consistently, because I'm not.
Right.
That's okay, job security, I guess, but. But I would like to see more of that. I'd love to see more companies really understand that their technology is just an enabler to a human dream, and to somebody being able to do something they really want to do. And I think there's more recognition with technology companies. I don't know what your take on it is. I'd be curious. But what I'm seeing too is also, I think millennial founders, it's really interesting. If I'm talking to a baby boomer CEO, it's a very different mindset. But if I'm talking to a millennial in their maybe early 30s, mid 30s, who's a technology founder, really phenomenally different mindsets. And whereas with the boomer, it's a little bit, well, let's talk about story, and you have to do a little bit of evangelizing. I find the millennials, it's much more of well, of course we're going to tell our story. Of course we're going to let customers tell their story. Why wouldn't we? And there's not even a question,
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting because you hear, of course, about the millennial consumer all the time now, and some people are freaking out over the millennials, and I keep equating them to that. Was it what TV show that had the little boy that could make anything happen? And so mom and dad were walking around on the Twilight Zone. Remember that Twilight Zone episode of the little kid that he could just catch things on fire, and so the mom and dad were tippy-toeing around him?
Yeah.
For some reason, that's what people are doing with the millennials, and I don't really quite understand why, because I think the millennials are at the heart of this storytelling push. They are showing up in the environment, the work environment, and they're not putting up with what everybody else used to put up with, and they want a more meaningful relationship with their employer, and they want the brand to stand for something much, much more. And there's a couple of really good books at Marketing to Millennials is one of them that keeps underscoring this point about we have to stop leading with features and benefits and get down to what actually makes a difference in a person's life by the use of the product or service. And so recently I was working with one of the very, very large utilities here, and they had middle management, which were all millennials, and some Gen Xers, I guess, in there. But they brought me in, and I worked with them to help them perfect or pull together a presentation to upper management. And they were, the millennial group was all about storytelling, and they were so much fun to work with that then they put together their presentation. They brought in, one of their senior coaches to look at it, and he kind of sat there and squirmed a little bit. And he was, okay, if you think this is really going to work. And they went in, they presented it to senior management. It was a strategy plan. And I got word back that, they just had rave reviews. Management had never seen a presentation quite like it. They were amazed the conversation that came out of it, because it was not just presenting, it was connecting people. Yeah. And it all came down to using a basic story structure, giving them permission to let their hair down a little bit. Yeah. And I got to tell you, in these young professionals, they did such a great job of being able to highlight some of the real challenges ahead for this organization, but in interesting, compelling ways. And they had solutions and suggestions. So it didn't come off as whining. It just came off as, here's the journey we're on, and here are some of the gaps that we're going to have to bridge, and here are some ideas on how to do that. And I was so impressed with the group, and then how it was received ultimately at senior level management.
That's great to hear. And that's a really great story. And I love that, because I think it highlights the differences to your point. It used to be, and I don't want to generalize, because not all baby boomers were wired that way, but a lot of boomers sort of have this split sort of, my professional life and then my personal life. And millennials don't make that distinction. That's a very artificial boundary for them, and they don't believe in it. So it's kind of like you show up at work and you should be who you're going to be. And there's no difference. And I would say that, Intel, you asked me who else is doing a good job at technology. I think Intel has really made strides there. And you can feel the influx of millennial workers in that workplace helping to bring about that change. And yet, it's interesting. There are industries that are still kind of struggling with that. I did some work with a large hospital. And the doctors, the average age of the doctors was a boomer, a doctor. And then you had these nurses. The average age of a nurse at this hospital was 26. So you had these 60-something-year-old doctors. You had some 20-something-year-old millennial nurses with nose rings and purple hair. Very professional, very smart, but didn't think there was anything wrong showing up with lots of nose rings and, hair. And the doctors were like, whoa. And so it's really interesting to see these cultural kind of things kind of play out where, doctors are going to have to understand that, look, there's a whole new generation of millennials going to change things. And this artificial boundary of personal and professional, we have to maybe let go of that boundary if we're going to move this organization forward to be more human and to meet the needs of a generation that's coming up in purchasing power and all kinds of things. So it's interesting to see these culture clashes a little bit,
Without a doubt. Well, and I think, business to business marketing, that term in and of itself is a misnomer, because businesses don't sell to businesses. Yeah. People sell to people. Yeah. And it might happen to be a person sitting behind the desk as a CFO or the purchasing agent or whatever, but you're still selling to the concerns and their fears as the human would, experience. So why lead with all these features and benefits? Just on our podcast the other week, which you were nice enough to be on about a month ago, we had so much fun on that at Business of Story. I had Ardath Albi, great name, Ardath Albi, and she's a specialist at customer personas, and we really had a wonderful conversation. And she was just talking about the trends now. She's seeing that things are just starting to turn. They're getting a much better sense for, okay, what is truly the customer journey, which to me seems like it's really been born out of what's happening online. Technology has totally opened up this whole new customer journey thing that now we all have to pay attention to and hard to get our heads around. But that all starts with truly understanding your audience in that godlike way. So, what do they care about? Where are they on the journey? And what part of the story do you need to be talking to them about?
Absolutely. There is no division anymore. It's all humans. We're all selling to humans, and we don't check our human cards at the door. Last time I checked, we don't leave our human card in the door, in our cars and walk into the building, and all of a sudden we're somebody else. And I think the other thing that's interesting, getting back to millennials is just they want to bring all of themselves to work, and there is that authenticity. And I think the other trend that we're seeing because of this, and it's really not new, I think it takes on a little bit different impetus because of millennials, but that is this idea of causes and social causes. And companies have to show that they care about things bigger than just their profits. And so, your example of Patagonia, it has a rich history of caring about this stuff anyway. But I think the companies out there that are really focused on millennials and all human beings, you really have to think carefully about what is your role in society and how do you show that you care. Warby Parker is very good at making millennials feel like they care about things in their lives. And I think you have to be mindful today of, people want a company that really gives a crap about them and gives a crap about the environment and other people and society. So I think millennials demand more, whereas I think boomers might have said, well, it's business and you don't have to, sort of blend the two. I think there's more of an expectation today that you are going to be. It's more than just social responsibility too, I think, Park. I think it's more that sense of, hey, we care. And there's something bigger out there that connects all of us than just the search for profits,
Well, and I think, being at the end of the baby boomer, generation, if you will, but still in that, I think educational system has done a heck of a job, intentionally or maybe unintentionally, I don't know, of silencing the storyteller. And I tell folks that I really believe that they're at the top of their storytelling game when they're in kindergarten. And once we got into education, it just had a way of silencing it. Draw within the line, stop telling stories, Park. I can't tell you how many times I was told that. I went to St. Brendan's, and I would always spend way more time in the confessional than everybody else. And when I'd come out, my buddies would say, geez, you had a lot to confess. I said, no, I had a captive audience. I could tell this guy anything, and he'd believe it, But Gordon McKenzie of Hallmark Cards has a really interesting story in his book, Orbiting the Hairball, the giant hairball. And he talks about going in and working with kids. It really a big passion of his were young kids and keeping that artistry, that fire alive in them. And he said he could go in the first grade and he would look around the room and say, who's the artist that created all this wonderful art? And he said every hand in the room would go up. Then he could go out that door, down one room into the second grade and ask that same question, and only half the hands would go up. Third grade, a third of the hands would go up. You see where this is going. By the end of the fifth or sixth grade, he was lucky to have one hand go up. And I think that's what's happened, especially in the older business professional, that the education has coached it out of them, corporate culture, social constructs, political correctness. And so, the older folks are willing to kind of, walk around tongue-tied and don't feel that they can open up. The millennials, they don't have that. They're like, man, they're wide open and they're like embracing again. So I think that's where this whole trend is coming from, or maybe not coming from, but being boosted by these new young professionals that are have the seat at the table now. And they are so much fun to work with. I just can't say that more because they are so open to trying new things. It's
I love
really
it.
great.
Amen. I preach it. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and I didn't have it, quite as strict as the baby boomers, but not as open as the millennials. And I really love this growing openness that millennials have to experimentation. I think the other trend is I see the brands that are really on the vanguard of being socially conscious. They're out there experimenting. They're trying new things. They're not afraid to put some levity and some humor and some into things, which which is music to my ears as somebody who has a comedy and improv background. They're not afraid because they understand that fundamentally humor is human, and they get that. And it's refreshing to see that. It's refreshing to see more people take risks. It's refreshing to see things like blab being used, like we're doing now, because they understand that there's something about a real-time human conversation. It's not spin. It's not time to manufacture a story and make it perfect. It's human, it's real time, it's conversational. And I think that the companies that are getting that are doing these amazing things. And they're going to be leaps and bounds, I think, ahead of the companies that are afraid to embrace some of these tools. I think either you love this kind of stuff or you hate it. But there's so many companies that I talk to that are still fighting a little bit against the wave of, for example, streaming video. And I say, why? And I think part of the reason they're really afraid of it is what we've been saying, Park, is that they really feel like, they've come from a world of, PR and spin and getting everything tied up with a bow. And this whole new world of conversational storytelling, in the moment storytelling that allows other people to have a voice is kind of scary, but that's the way the tools are going.
Without a doubt. I mean, that's what, like we said earlier, the brands are the story makers, but man, you turn that over to the wolves and you let them run with it. You know, I was thinking of Chipotle. Now, here's a brand that has had a very strong, resounding story about all natural, keep it close by and all that. And the food is really good. And of course, it's very unfortunate what they've been going through with their with what's been happening. And I mean, they had to close down all the shops there, 2 days ago, just to get everyone hygiene training, I guess. But what has always puzzled me, a couple things about the brand story that they tell, is all fresh and natural, but they have their burrito wrapped in a big piece of aluminum foil. And every time I see that, and my mother-in-law, passed away from Alzheimer's, and you just think, you hear about these connections between that and Alzheimer's. And I'm not saying there is an absolute one, but it's a disconnect, at least for me, that you go from all natural and then you wrap this stuff in aluminum foil and you hand it out. And then another disconnect I had with them, and I brought it up at Sustainable Brands. I was sitting in the room one day, and their head of marketing was up there on a panel, and they're very proud of their storytelling because they do a marvelous job. It's beautiful, the work they do in their videos and so forth, and their scarecrow that they came out with 1.5 2 years ago. And it's this haunting song, and it's showing the scarecrow, and it's railing against factory produced food consumption and technology and all this. And he finally makes his way out of the mean, dark city of all this factory food consumption to his little place out in the country. And he's, presumably safe and sound back at home again. And then at the end of this thing, what are they selling? They're selling their app. They sell, they're railing against technology to now sell their Chipotle app and video game. And I raised my hand and I asked the guy, I said, is it only me, or have you had other people have this disconnect with your story? On one hand, you're all this, but then you're selling me a technology on that side. He said, no, I've never had that brought up before, which I can't believe, because I had several people in that group come up to me afterwards and say, I've thought that same thing. So I just think brands have to be very, very careful. They're telling us a story, and I'm now taking their story and making meaning out of it in my own context. And if it doesn't all add up, then I and other consumers are the first one to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, I've got a disconnect here. You got to help me close that loop somehow.
Yeah, it's one of the, when we have a powerful story, you have to be held accountable for that story. And that's really the issue. And I think the other disconnect for me with Chipotle, and I've had similar conversations to what you've had. It seems to me, they could have gotten out in front of the story much more so. I think sometimes when these things happen, and I know they're upsetting. I mean, people getting sick is a serious thing. But I think I would have liked to have seen Chipotle get in front of this and say our whole commitment to locally sourced, free of, chemicals, kind of meat and all this stuff is really important to us. We're really working hard to try to figure out what's going on here. They were very, very quiet. And I unfortunately, sometimes this is where legal gets in the way sometimes of a brand. But the more human thing to do would have been to get in front of that story and say, no, this is, our whole thing is built around food safety and food that is wholesome. And so we're working really hard to make sure, we can identify this, but they were so quiet. And that sadly tells me that, because of maybe risk mitigation and legal issues, the legal department won. And I'm not sure that really helped the brand,
Yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot of, storytelling with big brands, but a lot of my business is storytelling with the underdog, the small brand, the small company. What do you share with them to make it easy to get them on board, to show them some simple ways to start getting their heads around their stories? Because that's the question I always get. The big brands always think, I got this under control, but it's the little guys that really need the help.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's a great question. And I think that's a whole other trend, because now that we're talking about storytelling trends, I think the rise of the small brand as having a level playing field, not quite level, but because of social media, being able to have incredible reach. I think we're seeing more conscientious, talk about that. It's interesting. I think one of the biggest challenges I see with smaller brands is that they have a mission. They have a reason why they started their company. And then all of a sudden, when they go to marketing it, they forget it and they tell you a very technical story. And then I'll say, all right, let's back up. what was missing that was the impetus or the catalyst for you starting this business in the first place? What did you want to create in the world when you envisioned your business? Then they'll tell me a whole other story. And I'll say, well, then why is that story not in anything you've done on your websites? And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. And so I think it's just raising awareness with small businesses about, look, you have an origin story. There was something you were on fire about because you wanted the world to be better. What is that for you? And let's make sure that story infuses a lot of what you do. And it's interesting, that disconnect for small brands, because I think they feel like they can't put themselves in the middle of the story. And I'm like, no, it is your story. That's what you have to do, is put yourself in that story. So I don't know. What do you see? Yeah. What's it?
Yeah. I think you're dead on. I experienced the same thing. And in fact, I was speaking yesterday at the Arizona Small Business Association. I see Gabe is on here. He was in the audience yesterday. Hi, Gabe. And I gave them sort of that same cautionary tale, and I took them through the 10-step story cycle process I work with brands on. And I say, first, use this on yourself. Yeah. As Simon Sinek would say, understand your why, just what you said. What is your origin story? Why did you start this in the first place? Get that story down to the point that, yeah, that's authentically me and why I did this. Then set that aside. Do the exact same process for your brand. Now write about your company, goes through the same 10-step process, then compare the two and see where the gaps are and see where the trending is and see where they match up. You're trying to align them as best you can. And then I said the simple process is now go to your website and see how well your website is sharing and telling the story. And I bet you I had 10 people come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh my God, I'm horrified. You're right. My website sucks. And one guy was laughing. He goes, and I'm a writer and my website doesn't even remotely express why I do what I do and for whom. And an analogy clicked in my head at the point, and I asked him, I go, you wouldn't take all these wonderful pictures of your family, throw a bunch of them in a photo album without culling through and putting in the best and thinking about the stories behind each one of those images and then tossing it on your coffee table for the world to see, would you? He saw where I was going with this and started laughing. And I said, so why do you do that with your business story on your website? Right. But it starts with what you said. You got to get your personal story together. And one other thing I'll add to that is I was fortunate to have Vincent Stanley, Director of Philosophy, also on Business of Story. And he's lectured a few times to our class at Arizona State in our Executive Master's Program. He's a wonderful man, by the way. He's been with Patagonia since the beginning. His story is, he told Yvon Chouinard that they were buds back then, and he said, I'll help for about 6 months, then I got to go. And he's been around there for 44 years, and he's just but he says what he sees in business, just what you said to amplify that, is we all go into business with this idea of an origin and a founder, making a difference in the world, doing something different. But once we then get into the business community, we want to blend in. We're afraid to let our hair down. We're afraid to really show who we are. And he says he sees that in his line of work with his vendors, across the board. He goes, it's such an interesting foible of us humans that we want to stand out until it's time to stand out. Then we want to blend in because we want to belong. And the last thing you want is your brand story to blend in. Yeah, it's interesting. You hit on something really, really foundational, which is very visceral for me, because I think sometimes the worst thing to happen to marketing today are marketers. And get them in a room and they are their own worst enemy. What's really interesting, and I had a similar conversation, is individually, at an organization that I was doing some work with, they would come up to me and say, I think we're really stiff. I think we got to lighten up. And then I get them all together in a room and they're all looking at each other. And somebody say, well, it's a little risky. I don't think we should do this. This is risky. And they're all looking at each other. Oh, yeah. Because nobody wants to admit, to be the first to raise their hand and say, you know what? I don't like our marketing. There's something about that group think dynamic where it just really can kill the creativity in the room. And that's something that, I think individually we all want to be, you're right. We all want to stand out, but we get really fearful when we think about a brand with legacy and heritage. And I think that's one of the reasons why I see a resurgence in Silicon Valley with a lot of app companies. When they don't have any foundation or history or legacy to start from, it frees them up because
They figure they got nothing to lose. They're coming right out of the gate. They're like Dollar Shave Club. They got no money, so they might as well make it funny and go, you know what? We got no budget. So let's just see if we can double down on virality and have fun and use humor and try something different because, you know, we got nothing to lose. We got no heritage to compromise. That is a very liberating thing. And I am seeing more app companies, and I'm happy to say it, out here in Silicon Valley, thinking that way. And they're thinking in that experimental way. And that, I think, is a really amazing place to be, you know?
How about the TV show, HBO's show, Silicon Valley? Have you seen that? And how is it received out there? I personally think it's the funniest thing on TV.
My husband and I laugh so hard when we watch that, when the kids go to sleep, that I'm always like, oh my God, we got to keep it down. But I feel like, I'm just going to say it. I pee a little bit I'm laughing so hard every time I watch it. I'm just going to say it.
I'm going
to say it, and I'll tell you why. As Park knows, I came out of high tech. I came out of Silicon Valley before I started my company. I worked with some big names, some of the names you probably are thinking of right now. I saw companies operate exactly like that. And it was Cubicleville, and it was Jargonville, and it was, it was jargon monoxide poisoning every day. And it was just this ridiculous hierarchy of silliness. And so much of what they do is so darn true and just comically heightened that I just cannot keep a straight face when I watch that show, because they nailed it. They nailed Silicon Valley on so many levels. So many levels.
Well, they've nailed me, I think, a few times on there too. I'm not in Silicon Valley. I'm in the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona. But some of their episodes, like when he went out to do his branding, and he was all hopped up on mushrooms. Not that I get hopped up on mushrooms when I do branding, but just all the whole tale of how they're going in there. And at some of the early episodes when they were talking about, yes, we've come out with this new, whatchamacallit, and it's going to save the world. Everything was about saving the world. And I'm like, oh my God, I've said that too. I'm about storytelling and branding to save the world. And so it struck me right at home. But I thought, if you're a technology company anywhere, or if you're at a very high level thinking type organization that has to brand itself, watch that show because it is an absolute primer on literally how to tell stories. So everything they're making fun of you about is actually true about your company. So how could you actually do something with that and point a little fun at yourself, but sell your product and really connect on a human level. I can't wait for the next season.
Oh, me too. Out. No, I love that show. I think that show is brilliantly funny, and Mike Judge is an incredible creator, and I just have so much admiration, and was fortunate to meet some of the actors at Sketchfest in San Francisco. It's a brilliant show, and you're right. I crack up all the time because it's just the mirror is just really interesting, but it is an object lesson in how to tell a story and be honest. And like the founder, Richard, go out there and be humble and just talk about your product and what it can do without exaggeration, without, just be honest. And I think there's something really beautiful about that too. So yeah, I agree. It's a great story. Let's talk about just maybe one or two more trends, and then we'll take some questions. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing. I was hoping we'd have questions, but I can see the chat window here in Blab for me is not working. So I'm going to say I don't know why that's happening. Are you seeing a chat window, Park? Because I'm not seeing one.
I've got a question window without any questions in it yet. So if you have questions,
absolutely. You don't have to come on. If you'd like to take a seat, we'll hop you on in just a minute here. If you don't want to be on camera, no worries, because maybe you're working from home on the Friday before Valentine's Day, and you're chill and you don't want to go on camera. Just text in a question, and Park and I are happy to chat about it. I wanted to also mention this interesting thing about with storytelling. This rise of episodic content and the rise of customer content a la GoPro and some of these other trends where we're seeing that a lot of companies are recognizing that they can actually just let more of their customers do the storytelling, and also they can bring an audience back with great episodic content. I think of Coca-Cola, what they did with Crossroads. If you're not familiar with Coca-Cola Studios, I know, again, big brand here, you don't have to have a big budget to do this, but they're very smart in having this ongoing story where people come back. And the stories don't have anything to do with their product, which is really beautiful. And I think there's a lot of trends there. So I don't know if you've got any things that you've seen under those trends, Park, but.
You know, I was just talking with Eric Munn, and Eric Munn is one of the social media gurus over at The Onion. And I didn't know this, but The Onion has its own ad agency called Onion Labs. Yes. And so we recorded him. We had a session on the Business of Story podcast. I think he will be on in a couple Wednesdays anyway. But he talked an awful lot about this episodic storytelling, and they, of course, are all focused on digital. All their episodic work is done digitally. But what I thought was interesting is they then need to join forces with the brand or even another agency. Is it's okay to have it happening. And of course, you're going to want to have it happen episodically digitally. But how does that play over into your storefronts? Or, you know, into your office or wherever. So to me, I think the really great opportunity right now for brands is to, yes, really understand and script, author that episodic journey. It's no longer just an ad. You're taking them by the hand and having some fun with them on digital. But then how do you connect that divide onto the real world, into the clicks and mortar world? So when they're coming into your stores, and I don't know that anyone's doing a really great job with that right now. But I think there's a big opportunity for brands to
That's
do
a great opportunity. And for everybody there, Park's referring to the Business of Story podcast. And I look forward to seeing that when that comes out. Yeah, I think that's going to be a great piece of content, because I think you're right. We're all trying to figure out, how do we have a recurring base, a recurring story? And I love your idea of connecting it to an experience, because storytelling, if you think about it, the customer experience is a story. That's fundamentally a story. So then how do I connect it back to that experience? And I'm really looking forward to hearing that. I'm going to bring Ashik. I'm going to bring you on. Okay. So then if you got a question, you can ask us. Hold on. Ashik. All right.
Welcome.
Ashik, are you?
Hey, by the way, this is my first time on Blab. So I'm just kind of checking this all out as we go. And
well, that's how I felt the first time I did it. It was like, trying to figure. Ashik, are you there? Do you have a question or no?
I see the radiating decapitated head of him.
Oh,
that's
no.
Cool.
Yeah. Sheik, we may have lost you. You want to try again, or maybe we got a technical difficulty on your end, or, Do you want to try? Well, Ashik, why don't you try calling in again and see if we, or you can, if you're having technical difficulty, go ahead and just type in a question and we'll happily take it. So either or. One of the bad things I have to warn you is that sometimes Blab does it. Sometimes it drops people, and but again, I'm an improviser, so this improvisational kind of medium is my jam. I'm swimming in my jam here.
Well, up here in the upper left-hand corner, it does say beta, so I'm assuming we are their beta testers as we go here. But it
is a great medium. Well, go ahead, Ashik, or anybody else who's got a question. If you want to take a seat, go ahead, and I'll add you, and you can ask a question. In the meantime, we've got about 15 more minutes, and I'm going to keep it on track so that Park can get to his next call, and everybody can go on to lunch and their holiday. And the weekend, and just a PSA for everybody out there. If you've got a significant other, you might want to just, as long as you're not like going to a drugstore an hour before you meet your significant other to buy them a stuffed animal. I'm just thinking of a PSA for your own relationship's sake. You're welcome.
Well, I'll tell you that Valentine's Day coming up here Sunday is my birthday. So for 28 years, I've bought my wife also a present on my birthday. And we were out for dinner the other night with a really, really great screenwriter who just finished his first film, and they're waiting to release it, starring Richard Dreyfuss and others. And when it comes out, it's going to be very, very funny. And I was telling him that story, and he quickly pulls out his pen and writes that down. Guy has to buy wife present on his birthday on Valentine's Day. And I go, what are you doing? He goes, I think there's something in that somewhere for a script. And that just cracked me up, because to me, it doesn't seem like that's a funny bit. But he goes, yeah, I actually think there's something there.
Think
so, you never know where you're going to find
you never know where you're going to find a story. And that's what I love so much about comedy. And comedy itself, to me, is story. It's you and the audience. You're telling stories about your life, and it's very intimate. And I love that, because there is a story there. So happy birthday, Park. And, you know, and
now that you all know, I'm expecting cards and gifts.
I just, on behalf of Park, I'm just going to say it, because I have a relative who has a birthday on Christmas. I don't think you should do the combo package. I think you should both you should get 2 different gifts, one for your birthday, one for your Valentine's Day. No combo deal. You know, there's no kind of passing off 2 for 1. All right, we've got Ali Raza. I'm going to try to add you here, your media studies person. So let me see if we can add.
We also have Roy Smolens joined us. I know Roy, he's out here. He's a heck of a great storyteller, marketer, communicator. Roy, do you have a question for us? I see you just
do you want to jump on? I'm going to add, if you want to take a seat, let's see if we can bring Ali on here. Let's see if we got this going here. Yeah, we're not having any.
Chris joined us. Welcome. Chris. Good to have you here.
Chris. Welcome, Roy. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, we're not seeming to have any luck in the department when we try to bring people on to take a seat, are we, Park? We're not having a whole lot of luck. I don't know.
Is there anything that we're supposed to do on this end?
No, I think that it may be, an issue on their end, maybe if they're on Wi-Fi. The one thing I will warn everybody, if you're on Wi-Fi and your Wi-Fi's spotty, sometimes Blab has a hard time. And if you're on a LAN, if you have the luxury of being on a LAN, it's usually a better connection. So I'm sorry. Ali, we don't seem to see you or hear you.
Hey, Kathy, here's a question, though, and I think it's a really good one from Roy. Comedy and how to use humor in communication. And, from being a stand-up world, it's really difficult to pull it off. It's great to use it, but it's hard to pull it off.
I would, but I also, and I've had this conversation and I've written about this because I think it's an important question. And thank you, Roy. It's a great question. I think there's a difference between levity and going for the joke. They're different. They're not the same. And I think a brand can have a lighthearted sense of itself and not take itself too seriously versus trying to be overtly over the top funny. And those are different things. So if you ask me, is comedy risky? The answer is it can be, yeah. But if you ask me, is it super risky to have a human side and show some levity? I would argue, no, it's not as risky as people think, because if you just make a customer smile by being witty or clever, that's still great. That's still better than not doing it. So I think there's a distinction there. Yeah. Roy, I'm going to try to.
And he says, humorous storytelling and science.
Yes. Roy, we're going to try to bring you on. I hope we have some success here.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, Roy. Are you?
Hi. Good afternoon.
We have success.
Hey, Roy.
We have success. We haven't been able to, sadly, bring other people on. We've had some technical issues. But, Roy, we see you. Hi.
Good. How are you all?
Good.
Oh, we're doing great.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
Do you have a question?
I do. I've been listening to today. There's a National American Academy of Science national meeting. And I was just saying they're really pushing this on the scientists, because yesterday they discovered the gravitational waves existence. And you can imagine how many jokes are coming up and around this and how to explain theoretical physics.
Yeah.
What's the storytelling behind theoretical physics to non-physicists? So what do you think about that?
What a great question. I will only say this. I am not a physicist, but I think one of my favorite scientists in the whole wide world is Neil deGrasse Tyson, a physicist, because he takes the complex and makes it accessible and simple. And part of the way he does that is, if you ever watch him, I love watching him, is that he's filled with joy and he uses humor very well, because he knows that things like multiverse theory are kind of like woo-woo to get your head around. And he's really good at making it accessible and using metaphors and sometimes comedy metaphors to make his point. And I think that can be an effective way to make a very heady concept simple and accessible. So, yeah.
Roy, I will jump in here. There's a terrific book out by Randy Olson called Houston, We Have a Narrative. And Randy is a really interesting character. Randy is a Harvard-trained PhD. He's an oceanographer that had tenure out in University of New Hampshire, I think. And he gave that all up to go to USC Film School, which then he graduated from, made several documentaries, and has written 3 books. And his life's passion now is to help scientists be able to turn their data into drama, to create stories around their science. And he uses this process, which I love the irony of it, comes from South Park and Trey Parker, when they use this and, but, and therefore to help create the foundation for their story. And he does a wonderful job in his new book, Houston, We Have a Narrative, about working with scientists and showing them how to make their information make sense to the rest of us in very simple, entertaining, story, built way. So that's, if you're looking for a good book to read, that's one I definitely recommend.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah. I haven't heard of that book, so thank you. That's a great resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, it follows along the lines of what you're doing with your podcast, Park. You're really going back to the basics of tying the relevance back to your targets and getting that story out there, which makes an impact on people's lives. So I like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm a big believer in what Randy has to teach. And he and I have become fast friends over this whole concept. And I said, your real story is here. You're this brainiac, but you went to Cartman to get your most basic story structure. I said, you ought to use
humor
that.
Works. I'm telling humor is among the most misunderstood, but most elegant of storytelling devices. It really is, because it is hard to do, and yet when it's done well, the simplicity of it is beautiful. And so humor done well. So it doesn't surprise me, and that we turn to a comedian for clarification. So there you go. There you go.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love it. So what else? What you got? We've got a few minutes left. What are you thinking, Roy? What trends are you seeing? I'd love to hear your perspective. What are you thinking in terms of trends in business storytelling that you're seeing?
Yeah, a lot of the work I'm doing right now has moved a little bit away from the for-profit side of things, more to the actual research science. And I had a meeting this past week at the Biodesign Institute, which Park probably knows. And you know as well, Kathy, they're the people who came up with the vaccine for the Ebola last year.
Yeah. Wow.
From the tobacco plants.
Yeah. Wow.
So I had a meeting with the researcher over there, and she's asking for help to meet with capital investors, venture capitalists who are going to look at her work on ion beam lines, which are ungodly expensive, put it that way. Yeah. But I'm finding it's the same old basics of communications. She can't quite get her head around, and she's German, I'll put that out there, but she can't get her head around what it is her audience or her targets need to hear to be able to, in her case, invest lots of money.
Wow.
You understand? So you're taking a very complex topic and then putting it out there to people who have purse strings. What do? How do you bring that back into her branding is clear. She's a brilliant lady. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm finding this to be very fascinating. Go ahead.
Well, and what an interesting thing, because it's so, you're bringing up a really important point, which is going back to the origin story that Park and I were talking about, is that power of that origin story can be a make or break, especially when you're looking for funding. When you're looking for funding, that is a really powerful narrative, and so you having that opportunity to shape that in the right way and really be impactful about how you change lives with something like this. This is a really interesting thing that you're working on. Yeah,
I think that's where it could
and no matter how brilliant it is and high and mighty, I'm a big believer. No matter what you're selling, and make no mistake, we are all salespeople. People buy with their hearts and they justify the purchase with their heads. It just is that simple. They may want to sit there and scratch their noggin and, take this in and try to make a rational decision. But man, it comes down to it. It's an emotional decision, first and foremost, to say, yes, I think I want that. And then they look at the rationality of it. It's like drilling down the website. You go to a website, you want that homepage to really capture you emotionally, get something going, and then you drill into it. And I think that's the power of story, no matter what we're selling. If we're selling science, if we're selling books, if we're selling the business of story, it's first connecting on that human level. And we just need to learn that somehow. Get that across.
I think I've always said that the job of a story is to sell optimism. You're selling not a solution. You're selling hope that there's something better, because people have problems. They don't need to be told they're wrong. They're really looking for optimism that their world can be better. And if you do your job right, you're selling a better outcome. And that's what, all of us do. Each of us does that. So I think that's well said. We're all salespeople. We
are.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things I'm coming across quite often is when I go into these institutes or these research environments, and you'll probably see it as well over at the sustainability section part, but you get these journalists or / media and or communication types who've come from the journalism side of things. And as soon as they hear the word sell, they kind of get these EBGBs of, oh no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. So that's an interesting intersection as well.
A four-letter word. Sell is a four.
Hey, if you're persuading someone to buy into your program, you're selling them. So whether it's persuasion or selling, it's all the same thing.
I think so.
It is. And I think that's because, I talked, and I know, Perk, you do too, and I'm sure, Roy, you do. A lot of journalists have been pitched in such bad pitches that their hair stands on end when they think they're going to be on the receiving end of another me pitch. And so getting your narrative down right, as we all know, is so important to be able to grab that journalist's attention and make it about something meaningful. That human interest story. Yeah.
It is.
Hey, Kathy, I'm going to have to sign off because I've got that 2:00. But I'd like to leave our viewers and attendees with one last
I was going to just say, give us your last thought before leaving.
As cheesy as it is, to always remember, a spoonful of story helps the data go down. So if you're telling a data-rich story, put a bunch of story into it to be able to get it to connect with your audiences and move them back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Park. And you can actually follow Park at Park Howell, and he's the Business of Story podcast host. So please check it out. Thank you, Park. Happy birthday. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us, Roy. Great to see you. And thanks everyone else for being here today on the show. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Park.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
All right. Bye. We've got a few more minutes before we close out. I want to honor everybody's time. I know that I like to keep these things to an hour so people can go have lunch and live their lives. But are there any final questions? And again, I apologize. My text chat window seems to have stalled, so I'm not seeing any new questions. If there's any new questions out there, Roy, I don't know if you see any questions. I want to make sure we get anything, any final questions answered. Okay, good. I don't want to leave anybody hanging. We don't want to leave anybody stranded. All right. Final thought, Roy, what's your final thought on the future of storytelling? What are you thinking?
I think the relevance issue comes back time and again, and with the age advantage, if you will, or the ease of technology, we have no excuses to not being very relevant or offering up relevant topic or content to our targets. Not doing so shows that we're being, slovenly or lazy to be able to not drill down, as Park was saying. I think that's really key. And otherwise, Park hit it again on the emotive side. If we're not pulling, we're just throwing things out there. So pulling is better.
Well said. Well said. All right. Yeah, I think it really comes down to a lot of the things we talked about. I think you're right. It all comes down to the emotions. And I think business for too long has avoided it. I'm glad to see it's coming. People are starting to recognize that, no, you need to have, even in business to business, we need to have an emotional conduit, because that emotional wrapper is the story that's going to anchor this in memorability. It's going to make everybody connect to your story. So rather than avoid it, embrace it, figure out how to really be authentic with the emotions, and not for manipulation to sell products, but really find the real honest emotion in your story, and don't be afraid to go there. I think that's really what it comes down to. Yeah, I like absolutely. That. Absolutely.
I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us. And I'm sorry to the folks that we had a little bit of trouble connecting. So we'll do this again. No worries. I invite you back to another one. We'll have you on there. I promise. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And have a wonderful Valentine's Day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.